Dave Mogensen sitting alongside me in the Oshkosh studios. Tonight we're going to be discussing the top 5 all-time favorite Super Bowl moments and the 2020 NFL Super Bowl Vegas odds. Dave, it's good to have you back on the show. How was the weekend? And ready to talk some Super Bowl moments tonight?
Yeah, definitely excited to talk about my top 5 favorite Super Bowl moments, at least the Super Bowls that I was alive for.
I know we're going to talk about the top 5, Dave. What is your first Super Bowl memory? Do you remember your first Super Bowl you watched and you're like remembering, hey, I remember this game. It's kind of like, specific, like who played in it. What year was that?
Yeah, I think the first Super Bowl that I really kind of remember vaguely is 49ers and Bengals with when Montana had his big comeback. I'm really bad with Super Bowl numbers, so I don't know numbers for. I don't even know numbers for the last Super Bowl, but that's the first one I can look back and remember. Being growing up in Chicago, the first 10 years of my life, obviously was there in Chicago, living in Chicago in the city in 1985. I have no recollection of that at all. Although I've watched many of my grandparents had tapes and things of all those games and their season wrap up tapes. So I saw that stuff too, but I don't actually remember watching any of that live. I was too young.
Yeah, I actually my first Super Bowl memory of all time, interestingly enough, was Super Bowl 20. Watching vaguely remember watching it at my grandma's Davenport in Greendale, Wisconsin, with my twin brother, and thinking, man, what are they watching on TV? That's kind of cool. Like, I was 6 years old, so kind of one of those first things where I look back. I don't remember the specifics of it. Now that I see the highlights, I'm thinking, oh man, I remember when I was 6 years old watching football. It's kind of where football was sort of born for me. So let's go ahead and get it started. Let's talk about your all-time top 5 Super Bowl moments. There they are, Dave. Let's take us through number one. We're going to count it from 1 to 5, right? Our number one would be
So
Favre's helmet, Super Bowl
obviously
31. Yeah.
transplanted to Wisconsin, became a Packers fan, really because of Brett Favre. So Brett Favre was the guy that turned me into more of a Packers fan than a Bears fan when I first moved here. And even though it was early on in the game, and people kind of attribute the moment where he's running across the field with his helmet off and so excited to be like the end of the game, that was right after he audibled to the same play that Joe Montana audibled. Mike Holmgren came from San Francisco, similar playbooks, and Favre wasn't known as the great video watcher and film watcher kind of guy, but he saw something, checked to an audible. It worked. Andre Rison runs right down the middle of the field, wide open for a touchdown. And Favre was so excited for that moment that his audible actually worked. And you see him running through the field, the early part of the game with his helmet off, like the Packers had just won the Super Bowl. Obviously, there was a lot more to happen before they won, but that's when I think Super Bowl. That's the first thing that pops in my mind at this point.
Yeah, I remember Favre ripping his helmet off. I mean, burned into your memory if you're a Green Bay Packers fan, which we obviously are. Fantastic experience. Super Bowl 31 was one of those things I remember as a kid too, where the lead up to it, obviously we know it's 2 weeks generally speaking between the conference championship game and the kickoff of the Super Bowl, and I remember looking back on it thinking, man, this is going on forever. Like all news stories on the evening news and the 10 o'clock news were all Packer related, people that were going down to the game, and then you see him do that in the game, and you think, man, that's like someone in our family. Like that's we all have a sort of a deep connection to Brett Favre.
Mm-hmm.
So that's awesome. All right, let's take us to your next one, Dave.
So my next one is the Doug Williams Super Bowl. That's one that's really dear to my heart. I think that's an awesome story. The Doug Williams story in general is really awesome, what he's accomplished in his career and all that stuff. But for him to come out and just light up the Broncos is something that I think is really fun, especially as a Packer fan too, because the Broncos, they beat the Packers. Packers almost won back-to-backs, and they didn't because of the Broncos. So you can go back and watch that game as a Packer fan and get really excited to see Elway just get it taken to him by Doug Williams. So I think that's a great story. I think that's a great something that should kind of live forever in NFL lore is the Doug Williams kind of coming out, not being the guy, becoming the guy. If you go backtrack to Doug Williams' career and how good he was, like with the Buccaneers when they first came out, and how he was so great and kind of brought that franchise to where they were. And he never really got a clean shot. He was always that guy trying to fight for his shot. So he finally had that season where it all came together, and boom, he's going to live in NFL lore forever.
Yeah, didn't Doug Williams get knocked out of that game in the first quarter, and he came back and they were actually
Came back.
trailing. They were actually trailing, right,
And then
to
the
the
second
Broncos.
quarter, he went crazy.
Right, he threw 4 touchdowns
Four
before
touchdowns,
halftime, and that's right. Yeah, that's right. He
second
was the
quarter. Yep.
Super Bowl MVP. Great performance by Doug Williams. First black starting quarterback to win a Super Bowl. Can't always gotta mention that. Doug Williams, number 2 for my man Mogensen up there in Oshkosh. Who we talking about number 3 as we, go through our Super Bowl highlight list here on Double Coverage Radio?
So that the my third one is Steve Young. So Steve Young, we know Steve Young was Joe Montana's backup. He also messed around with the Buccaneers and did some of that stuff. Then he's Joe Montana's backup, and then we know what happened, right? Similar to a la Favre Rodgers, they say Joe, you can keep playing. It's not going to play here. We're going to ride with the younger guy. And then Steve Young's big thing for his first couple of years as a starter was, well, he's not Montana. He can't take us to the Super Bowl. And then you get that 1994 season when Steve Young just goes crazy in the Super Bowl to accumulate a great season. And that one moment on the sideline, it's fourth quarter. He's out of the game, right? Because they're killing the Chargers. And it's fourth quarter, and he just looks at the camera and goes, "You can take it off my back." And he pulls that imaginary monkey off his back. I think that was a really great moment in general in NFL history, and it's one that kind of just sticks in my mind. I can think of that long touchdown pass to Jerry Rice. I can think of some of the other stuff, but that game and thinking of Steve Young's career, that's the first thing that jumps in my head.
Yeah, he threw 6 touchdown passes, if I recall, against the San Diego Chargers. I'm trying to think of the name of the quarterback for the Chargers. Stan Humphries, I believe, was the quarterback at that
Yep.
time, and those are the years at the Niners when just absolutely dominant. Right, playing in the early '90s. They had some great matchups there in the NFC. Great Super Bowl, definitely. Who else we got on this list, Dave?
So next down, number 4 is when you look at Packers Super Bowl history. The Packers won Rodgers 2010 Super Bowl, right? I think the thing that sticks out to me is I think the best throw Aaron Rodgers has ever made, ever. Part of it because of the magnitude of the stage, right? Being in the Super Bowl and where he was at. But I look at Aaron Rodgers' throw where he just pegged it in on a seam route to Greg Jennings with Palomalu right there and a linebacker right there and the other safety right there and 3 guys kind of culminating right on it. And if you watch the replays of that and see how many fingertips were right there to get that ball, but Rodgers was able to sneak it right in. And that's one that if I think of that Super Bowl, I think of the Clay Matthews thing, and I think of some of the other stuff. But the biggest thing I think of is Aaron Rodgers just nailing that throw right in the money on that seam route.
Yeah, that was definitely wasn't that a second or third and long, and they had to get the conversion for the first down, and he just ended up roping it in there. I think the shot we have here is Palamalu's finger, or whoever the corner is that's in that coverage, just grazing the football there. So great play. Where did you watch Super Bowl 45, Dave?
So I didn't have any crazy moments. So I was just sitting in my house watching it at home. So it wasn't. I didn't have a big Super Bowl party at that time for that one. So just sitting at home with a few friends and some family and watching the game there.
And bringing the Lombardi back to Green Bay after a little bit of a drought there, definitely.
Yeah. Then my fifth one that I think is a really good story, right? The old year where Kurt Warner kind of came introduced to the NFL as what he could be, and Trent Green goes down, and we know the story, right? Trent Green is there, and the Rams are supposed to be decent. Trent Green tears his ACL in the preseason, and Dick Vermeil says we're going to ride with Kurt Warner and we're going to play good football. And Dick Vermeil knew a little bit better than us because he had seen Kurt Warner all preseason and all of training camp. And Kurt Warner comes out and proceeds to be the ringleader of the greatest show on turf, and they go to the Super Bowl and they win by a yard. Kevin Dyson falls short, and they win. So I think that's a pretty cool story. If we flipped it to maybe worst Super Bowl moments, I think when Kurt Warner threw that interception to James Harrison was with the Cardinals, that might be one of my top 5 worst Super Bowl moments, just because I really like Kurt Warner and his story and what he stands for. So it would have been nice to see him get that second one. We know
Yeah.
Tom Brady stole him his second time with the Rams. So I think those are the top 5 when I think of Super Bowls and moments that pop in my head when we talk about Super Bowls and we're talking about Super Bowl odds for this upcoming year in a little bit. Those are the top 5 that jump out to me and scream Super Bowl.
Yeah, that's interesting you bring up the Kurt Warner when he played for the Arizona Cardinals. He really did sort of dominate the NFC for the last couple seasons before he ended up retiring. Arizona, one of those teams that has not won a Super Bowl, like the Chargers, another team in your top 5 that faced Steve Young and the 49ers. So both of those franchises looking for that elusive first Lombardi. We'll go ahead and switch up the call an audible here, and we'll go to Travis's top 5 Super Bowl moments. The number one for me, this is pretty simple. If you look over my shoulder here, right above my right there, I got Desmond Howard on my wall. There he is, Desmond Howard on the wall, running to daylight. Great moment for me. I remember watching the game, and he broke that touchdown, and I thought, wow, this is like historical in the sense that yes, you want the Packers to win. Obviously, they needed a score because New England had just pulled to within 27-21, like late in the third quarter. And then listening to the gameplay, the broadcast to me was just incredible. And then at the end, when he did the Robotron in the end zone and then did the Heisman pose, which he said after the game he's only done in one other game, and he played for the Raiders. So the fact that he did the Heisman pose to me was pretty neat moment as a Packer fan, and just in general looking back. That's one of those experiences too where you grow up and you just wanted Green Bay to do so well, and they ended up losing all those heartbreaking NFC title games, and then to finally break through and have it be in that fashion, I think it was like one of those moments for the everyman, right? Like Desmond Howard breaking that kickoff return is like everybody living in Wisconsin having like a breakthrough moment like in your own life. That's just it's different having that experience here with sort of the culture we have with how we look at football as well. So the other one of the first Super Bowls besides Super Bowl 20 with Chicago is Scott Norwood missing
Sure.
the field goal against the New York Giants in Super Bowl 25. And I remember at the very end of that game thinking, it's just a field goal. And I didn't really realize, obviously being a young kid in my, younger years, the sort of the pressure, right, Dave, of special teams. And you don't really see a lot of Super Bowls, especially come down to the final play. I know they talk about the greatest game ever played between the Baltimore Colts and the New York Giants and stuff in the 50s, but this was one on a field goal that, if it would have just drifted inside that upright, would have been a franchise tilting win. Buffalo never did win a Super Bowl, so that was kind of their closest shot, just in terms of Jim Kelly and Thurman Thomas and those guys not getting a championship. Pretty monumental moment there from for me in the top five. We definitely
Yeah,
want
I
to
think
go
I
ahead.
always wonder if they would have won that game, how Jim Kelly would have been perceived. He's obviously in the Hall of Fame and he went to four straight Super Bowls. But if he just won that first one, how much higher would he be? Would he be in that discussion of greatest quarterback of all time? And he's never really in that discussion. Yeah, he's like, oh yeah, Jim Kelly was really good. He's a Hall of Famer. But you look at what he accomplished with Buffalo and totally brought the spread wide open offense to the NFL. Goes to four straight Super Bowls, and you're like, gosh, this guy should really be in people's top five or top 10, but he never kind of makes it when they have the discussions of those top five or top 10 quarterbacks.
Yeah, I agree. I remember, everybody remembers vividly Buffalo just catching all these bad breaks. Obviously, the Norwood miss for me is kind of that penultimate right kick that had they made it right, they get one and then they lose another three. There's actually a fascinating ESPN 30 for 30 on the Buffalo Bills called The Four Falls of Buffalo. If anybody has seen it, it's worth, if you haven't seen it, it's worth taking a look. It's kind of chronicles each of those four seasons and kind of how they went through the process. And to go to four straight Super Bowls, I mean, in the modern era or any era, you talk about three consecutive championships, right? The Packers won three, Dallas won three. Going to four Super Bowls is an accomplishment that is just incredible. And I'm not one of those guys that sees only getting a Super Bowl title as sort of the end all be all of what makes a team sort of all time great or a player even. But to go to those four Super Bowls to me is pretty incredible experience, pretty incredible accomplishment. So, and then number three, Adam Vinatieri for the New England Patriots, kicking a game-winning field goal against a heavy favorite in Kurt Warner, I believe, in the Rams in
Definitely.
Super Bowl 35, if I recall. I was actually working. I was going to school at UW Milwaukee, and I just started a job at Hooters of Grand Avenue. And the game was on the big screen TVs, and we were eating wings and hanging out and drinking colas, and just great experience. I remember thinking to myself, man, who is this Tom Brady guy? Because Drew Bledsoe was the man for New England during that previous 6 or 7 years. Then he got hurt, and I thought, man, it's kind of interesting to me too to think how long did Brady start? And that was kind of it for him when he led them back to the Super Bowl. And a lot of people don't remember this about that particular Super Bowl run for the Patriots. Drew Bledsoe actually came back and won the AFC Championship game
Yep,
on the
definitely.
road at Pittsburgh to put New England in the Super Bowl. A lot of
Brady
people
got
don't remember
hurt.
that. Yep, Brady got hurt in the AFC divisional round game and couldn't play in the AFC title game. So to me, again, as you can tell, I have a soft spot for special teamers, place kickers and stuff. Vinatieri, obviously a lock for the Hall of Fame. He is my number 3. John Gruden is going to be on the list here. John Gruden, who coached the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to a Super Bowl win in Super Bowl 37 against his former team, the Raiders. Um, Interesting to note, John Gruden was second youngest coach ever to win a Super Bowl at that time. To me, it was just awesome watching that defense with Derek Brooks and Warren Sapp just dominate. And the Raiders, to me, were a team that had so many opportunities. Rich Gannon at quarterback, who's kind of one of those guys you think of in that era as sort of a dominant player. And man, the Raiders, that really set them off. That loss kind of catapulted them into 10 or 11 or 12 consecutive losing seasons where the fan base shifted. They were in Oakland again, just couldn't get out of their own way. Ended up drafting Jamarcus Russell. I mean, they win that championship. There's a whole shift in free agency, I think, in terms of that approach. So to me, John Gruden, number 4 on my Super Bowl all-time top 5 moments. And we'll get it to number 5, which is none other than David Tyree, the helmet catch against the Patriots in Super Bowl 42. Incredible game. I remember, I watch Rodney Harrison now on ESPN and some of the broadcasts on NBC as well, and their affiliate. And I think, man, that's the guy that gave up one of the greatest plays. A lot of people consider Tyree's helmet catch to be probably the greatest Super Bowl play ever. I don't think it's necessarily in that conversation, just given the context of what there's been 54 Super Bowls, and of every play that's ever been thrown, that's probably the winner. Probably the most unlikely one, right, Dave, in terms of probability of odds. Like, what are the chances of a guy, Manning with everything working against him on that drive, and they completed 3 fourth down passes, and then he hits that bomb to put him in range to get that touchdown. Did you watch that game? Do you remember the helmet catch pretty vividly as in terms of one of your memories?
Yeah, I remember that game. I remember being a fan of what the Patriots were doing at that time and wanting the Patriots to complete that season and go through and finish that season. And I was upset. I'm like, I cannot believe this just happened. Right? You're watching it, and Manning almost gets sacked twice in that play. He's got guys hanging on him when he throws it. Tyree has got blanket coverage on him, and you just look at it, and you're watching the replays, and you just can't believe it's one of those plays where you go back, and even now you look at it, you're like, how in the heck did this happen? I think that's the beauty of football. Is one of those things where things like this happen, and this guy just made a fantastic play that he probably wouldn't make 9 other times out of 10. But in that moment, at that heat of the game, he made the play.
Yeah, Harrison has gone on record a bunch of times. Obviously, he's still bitter about it when they banter back and forth on NBC. See, he calls it the one that got away, but he said he intentionally interfered with him, and he wasn't expecting to make the catch, which just is, to me, at that time, Harrison to me was one of the most feared safeties in the league. So the fact that he was getting interfered with and then he came down with it was definitely a pretty exceptional play. So that concludes our top 5 Super Bowl highlights of all time. I know, Dave, you threw in one of those lowest Super Bowl moments. We were going to do a top 5 list, but I figured we just keep this glass half full kind of show. My all-time worst favorite Super Bowl moment would be John Elway sneaking it in the end zone in Super Bowl 32 while Green Bay stood around and watched and gave us an opportunity to lose a Lombardi Trophy when I was 17. Still stings.
I
That
think
was
the most interesting thing about yours, if you go back and look at it, is the Gruden one. Gruden coaching the Raiders gets traded to Tampa Bay. Like a coach gets traded. Like how many? You don't see that hardly at all. Coach gets traded, and then he goes there and look what happens, right? Who would have thought the Raiders would go on to the Super Bowl? And then you end up finding out that the guy that took over for him, Bill Callahan, was his offensive coordinator when he was with the Raiders. Didn't change any of the checks, the code words for the checks. So you go out there and Gruden's obviously telling the defense, and we all know Tampa Bay was put together based on that defense. Hey, this means this means this means this, just in case they didn't change it, figuring they probably did. Little they know,
right.
here comes the Super Bowl, and Derek Brooks and John Lynch are like, oh my God, they didn't change the checks, and they know exactly what's coming anytime Cannon checked at the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, the other thing is a lot of people don't remember this. The night before the Super Bowl, the Raiders starting center Barrett Robbins went MIA, and part of the reason why they didn't make the checks in their walkthrough is because Robbins was going to start, and they thought the backup center wasn't going to be able to potentially make the call. So Callahan thought, we'll just stick with what we know. Obviously, Gruden had the ammo going into that game. You'd think you'd disguise your calls, right? In that situation, if you're one of the coordinators, you would have gone up to him, and that it makes you wonder sort of the ineptitude of the Raiders. First of all, giving away what they did to obviously let Gruden go. What do you do in that situation if you're a coach and you go into a game? You know, you've been an offensive coordinator in the Indoor Football League and at various other spots in your coaching career to this point. What do you do from a play calling and disguise type of standpoint when you're putting guys in and you're saying, here's the call, what do we need to do to sort of disguise those plays?
I think, I mean, if you look at even watching NFL games, right? Most coaches that are calling plays, you can't even, they don't want you to even see their mouths, their lips moving. They'll cover their face with their play card when they're calling the play into the huddle, right? Or into the earpiece to the quarterback.
Right.
So most teams will go through with different checks week by week, let alone season by season. There might be some that stick. You know, people will know the Omaha check from Peyton Manning, and there's some that stick that are base calls, but stuff that really is like play specific. It's very often changes from week to week, if not every couple of weeks. Especially if you're in a place where you're playing, you know, conference rivals, you're going to play them twice. So those things like that. I think that even trickles down now to the high school level where teams are not using the same calls week in week out. They have new play sheets with different numbers and things along those lines. I know in my experience when coordinating offenses and being head coaches in different spots, we always had at minimum different play sheets, different play scripts, different things week by week, and our checks were really geared towards the team we were playing. So we let those names kind of integrate week by week. We had just very few checks that kind of stayed for the year forward. But I can guarantee you that if I had an assistant coach, or in this case, the head coach, leave to go to a rival team, I definitely would have cleaned out all the checks and changed everything before this next season even began, because that's one thing that, although it's all relatively the same, and I'm a big proponent that there's not really magic plays, right? There's magic players, not magic plays. But football coaches kind of get in that little thing of, this is my playbook, and you go back to like the water boy, right? My green book, and I can't let anybody else see my green book. So there's a lot of that going on, which makes it even weirder that Bill Callahan just said, yeah, just run whatever we've been running for. You guys are good with it. It's just so odd.
Yeah, it definitely strikes me as a little bit odd that he was so uh, blasé in the biggest game of his life. And Bill Callahan, from all accounts, is a pretty competent offensive mind for the most part at all of his stops. He's done fairly well. So most recently at the University of Nebraska. Dave, that actually brings up your Waterboy reference there. Double Coverage Radio will be doing a top 5 sports themed movies show at some point in the future. So keep that in mind. Maybe the Waterboy cracks that top 5. Maybe not. You'll have to tune in and see where we go with that. We're actually going to switch gears a little bit here on Double Coverage Radio and talk a little bit about the newly released 2020 Las Vegas Caesars Super Bowl odds. This is one of those things, Dave. I think we talked about it in the draft lead up and some of the programming that we did last weekend before the NFL draft. It's the NFL offseason, and any little tidbit that you can get to sort of satiate the fire of competition, if you will, is great. And today, the NFL Caesars and Sportsbook released their Super Bowl odds. I'm going to go ahead and bring these up. We're going to talk a little bit about the odds in terms of value. And first things first, Dave, from a sportsbook and action perspective, how does it affect you as a fan if you're watching games now and you see, hey, there's a ticker? Like, we'll use the XFL as an example, where they're showing in-game wagering tendencies and some of the odds in those situations. Is that something that you think about as a player or a coach?
I definitely don't think that most players or coaches are thinking a lot about that. You know, the betting or fantasy football or things along those lines where people are putting money on the game. I don't think in general they're thinking about that too much. It's just something that's part of the game, right? It's really ingrained into what sports are in the world, right? It drives competitiveness in everybody. You know, a lot of people are watching the Last Dance documentary, and last night's was really big on Michael Jordan, his competitive nature. That it's not really the gambling per se; it's just another way for people to compete. So the world is full of people who wish they could play in the NFL, right, and want to play in the NFL. You and I included, right? We would have loved the opportunity to be good
Yeah.
enough to play in the NFL. But this is a way for us to use the NFL but still compete in our own way, right? So it's really a kind of living vicariously through the NFL in a way that some people find really exciting.
Yeah, I figured once I knew fairly young in my life that I was never going to play in the NFL, I figured I'd my next goal will be to maybe write about it. So we're getting where we need to be with it. Obviously, you're in coaching. Super Bowl wise, how interesting is it to you to think about an NFL team being in Las Vegas? Because for a long time, for a number of years, even back before Roger Goodell, right before Paul Tagliabue gave up his rights as a commissioner, we thought maybe there's never going to be a team in Vegas. Now we have the Las Vegas Raiders. How interesting is it to you? Curious is it to you to see Las Vegas in front of an NFL football team's name?
I think the stigma of sports betting really kind of started wearing off when the internet really popped off in the mid 90s, right? Coming in the late 80s with all the Pete Rose stuff and all that happening in the 80s, I think that really scared every major pro sports organization going forward about betting. But then as the internet kind of evolved in the mid to late 90s and to the point where it doesn't matter if you're in Antarctica, if you want to place a bet, you're going to place a bet because you're just going to jump online. Where there was a time and place where you had to either be in Vegas or you're betting offsite with somebody a little bit shady in a place not in Vegas, right? So either in Vegas or Atlantic City, or you're not betting any place real clean. So I think the fact that the internet age kind of evolved and forced that to where it's the point now where having a team in Vegas is, if you want to find trouble and you're a guy in the NFL that makes a lot of money and you're looking for some trouble, you can pretty much find it in any NFL city. So at this point, Vegas is just NFL city with a little more bright lights and maybe a little bit more to do at 2 or 3 in the morning than some of the other towns.
Let's talk a little bit about the odds that we have here. Obviously, coming in clear cut favorites. It's my perspective, and you can weigh in on this if you want to, Dave. Winning a Super Bowl is probably the most difficult thing to do in sports, and I believe that the Super Bowl hangover is a real thing. The Chiefs are current favorites at plus 600 to repeat as Super Bowl champions in Super Bowl 55. Can you believe it's been 55 times they've played this thing? So Super Bowl 55 being hosted by Tampa Bay at Raymond James Stadium. Talk to me a little bit about your perspective on the Super Bowl hangover. How does it winning a championship really affect the team in terms of preparation the next season? Because you work so hard for it, you're game planning all year, you put all this effort in, and you reach the pinnacle. Is there really such a thing as the hangover? What do you think about that?
I definitely think there is. I think what really has made the Super Bowl such a huge event in the whole world, right, is the fact that you come in, you tune into that game, that there's going to be a team that walks out as the world champs in the NFL, right? Where all the other major sports, it's a series, and it's you might know if there's a game 7, right, or if there's a game 6, and if this team wins, it's over. But if that team wins, they're going to go another game. You tune in, you can put everything around it, knowing that this is going to happen. And I think the beauty of that is with the Super Bowl hangover is people build so much into it, and since you're not battling in series, you have to be perfect in every single game, or at least better than the other team. That's where you get things that happen, like the Tom Brady Super Bowl win, his first one, right? A rookie, second year guy coming through, and he was just better than everybody else. Had it been a series between the Rams and the Patriots, do you think that the Patriots win 4 out of those 7 games? Probably not, right? Probably the Rams go out and win it. So the fact that it's one game and then teams are building up. You go all the way to the Super Bowl and you're so excited that you did it, right? I've accomplished this. And you have to then figure out, okay, once you're on top, it's a little bit harder to stay on top, right? So everybody else now, it's true that at the next season after you win a Super Bowl, everybody else wants to beat you. Every game you go out, I want to beat the Chiefs. If I'm looking at this chart, and the schedule is going to get released later this week, and we'll do a show to talk about that. But if the Jaguars go to play the Chiefs next year, let's say, and the Jaguars are sitting here at the worst Super Bowl odds, they're probably going to have a bad season. But if they can say they beat the Chiefs, they might say, I had a pretty decent year. I beat the Super Bowl champions, right? So
That's
that
true, yeah.
target gets put on your back. So as much as it is hangover, it's more. I think it's less hangover and more risen expectations, and it's harder for everybody to meet those expectations when they're sitting on top of you like that.
Yeah, interesting. I like where you bring up the ideal that you've got 16 other games the following season where every team is giving you their best. We're going to knock off the Super Bowl champions. The other thing is, you think about when you win a championship and you go, well, now we won the championship. What's next? Are you going to prepare as much as you did in the lead up to your championship? It takes a special type of commitment, right? Especially in the NFL when it's not 1968 or 1970. where you have, a job and you're a carpenter or a teacher or selling real estate, 7 months out of the year. Then you go to training camp and you're playing NFL football for 14 games. This is a commitment, and there's a lot more involved in terms of the buy-in you have to get. And I think Mark Murphy talked about that, and Mike McCarthy in Green Bay recently in 2010 when they won the championship there. He talked about it as being a buy-in from every level of support staff in the entire organization. We're talking people that work on the pro shop. We're talking about personnel. We're talking about the training staff. We're talking about the scouting department, the medical team, all that kind of stuff. So you got to have everybody sort of on the same page. And just to let everybody know that from an odds perspective, Caesars has slotted in the Jaguars at plus 10,000 odds. So if you were to put $100 down on the Jaguars to win the Super Bowl, and they did, you'd win 10 grand. Cool money. Not necessarily a shot you want to take given the condition of the Jacksonville Jaguars as an organization. Rounding out that plus $10,000 net there, Dave, Carolina, the Cincinnati Bengals, and who held the number 2 overall pick in the NFL draft recently?
The Redskins.
The Washington
Washington.
Redskins. So those are your 4 best bets, depending on the return, if you want to get high return, but your weakest odds of winning. Meanwhile, we'll bring this back up on the screen here. We'll show the audience a little bit here of top odds in this one. San Francisco is a plus 1,000. So markedly, your bet changes for every $100 you put down on the Ravens, you only win 7. So obviously the odds are a little stronger in the Ravens. What do we think about some of these teams here? Let's talk about the top 4 on this Super Bowl odds here at Double Coverage Radio, presented by Caesars Sportsbook, showing us the graphic. What do we think about the Chiefs, Ravens, Niners, and Buccaneers? The Buccaneers are Super Bowl favorites. Talk us through that, Dave.
Well, I think you look at the top four, right? The top two really no surprise at all with the Chiefs and the Ravens. Chiefs are going to bring back everybody of substance to their team. They're adding new pieces in the draft, and they're as hard as it is to continue to win a Super Bowl and go back to back. They're still going to be the favorites until they are no longer either in the playoffs or out of the contention, right? So Chiefs are going to be there. Mahomes stays healthy. He's in that elite upper echelon of quarterbacks that's always going to have his team in Super Bowl contention. Ravens, Lamar Jackson's trying to get into that echelon, right? They've added some really nice new pieces, and Ravens are a team that maybe Patrick Queen is the answer to them, and he can be all over the field and help them beat the Chiefs in the playoffs. But no surprise there. 49ers are also going to bring back everybody of substance. They made the one trade for their defensive line, but they went out and had a great, seemingly great draft. So them obviously losing the Super Bowl doesn't hurt their odds too much. They're still right there in the 3. But you hit the nail on the head with the Buccaneers. If you looked at the odds, Super Bowl odds 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, pre Tom Brady, I'm sure the Buccaneers were somewhere in that Bears, Broncos, Chargers, Falcons area, and they're at the plus 4,000, plus 5,000. But bringing in the best quarterback of our all time, the most Super Bowl wins of any quarterback into your team with offense that was already pretty good, adding a couple nice pieces in the draft, bringing back that quarterback's all-time favorite target and Rob Gronkowski. And, yeah, it's going to shoot a lot of people up. Now, the part of this is a little bit deceiving, right? You think Vegas is like, all right, let's shoot up the odds because a lot of people are going to bet on them, and then they're going to lose that bet because there's no way that the Buccaneers are going to win a Super Bowl, right? So there's, Vegas is the one thing people have to understand is Las Vegas is not in the business of losing money. So there's always a little bit of tricks and things to this and some points to that. But the Buccaneers are the hot button topic of the offseason, and bringing Tom Brady, you could probably put Tom Brady on the Jaguars, and they would move at least from the right side of this list to the left side.
They would definitely move from plus 10,000 if they had Tom Brady calling plays under center. The sharp money, obviously, where bettors are throwing down on these odds, love the Buccaneers at plus 1,200. But at the end of the day, here's the thing. Let's talk a little bit more about Tom Brady. Yes, he has the Super Bowl pedigree. Yes, he's a perennial winner in the playoffs, and obviously all of his expertise at the Patriots. How do we feel about the offense and all the opportunities that are going to be around for targets? We've got OJ Howard, who is going to be on the field at the same time with Rob Gronkowski. You got Mike Evans, you got Chris Godwin, Cameron Brate is still there at tight end. How does Tom Brady take advantage of those weapons? Do you think that that's more of a detriment to them, just given that they haven't played together?
I definitely think that Tom Brady has proven to be a guy that's going to do whatever it takes to get on the same page with his receivers. I would not be surprised if he's had numerous conversation with those guys already. I think the key to this is Bruce Arians, right? So Bruce Arians is a quarterback whisperer. He worked with Peyton Manning. He resurrected the career of Carson Palmer out in Arizona in the desert after Carson Palmer was left for dead with Cincinnati. Bruce Arians worked with Ben Roethlisberger when he was first starting out. So Bruce Arians is known around the NFL circles as not only a quarterback friendly guy, but a guy that'll make sure that he maximizes the weapons he has. So you look at the offense they had last year. Jameis Winston, who we found out recently was almost half blind, still threw for over 4,000 yards and 30 touchdowns. The interceptions are the interceptions, right? So if Tom Brady can have a similar season to that with even now some more weapons, that Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense is going to be really, really good, going to be unreal. The couple pieces they added to that offense, and then their defense was okay last year, and I think another year under the defensive coordinator they have there, and they will be a team that'll be need to be reckoned with in the NFC.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think there's lots of opportunity from a target share perspective to kind of go around on that offense. Arians does have a history, sort of a track record of being successful with a number of different quarterbacks over his 10 years as head coach. Rounding out the middle of the pack, as we talk about what we say the left side of the Super Bowl odds sheet, the Patriots at plus 2,200. How do we feel about that being kind of an empty number? Is Jarrett Stidham going to really put them in a position to compete right away in the AFC East, just given where they are for a playoff spot?
I think it's hard for all of us that aren't in the Patriots offices, aren't in the meeting rooms, and aren't on the practice fields to kind of know what Stidham is going to be able to do. It's very obvious that Bill Belichick feels like Stidham is gonna be the guy, and he's going to give an opportunity to be the guy. And if he can't be the guy, they'll ride Brian Hoyer for a year and look for their quarterback either in free agency next year or in the draft next year. But he must have done something in his first year to make Bill Belichick believe in him, and that's a big mark of somebody believing in you. If you could pick any front office coach in the NFL to believe in you, it's probably Bill Belichick, right? So the fact that he's done something in his first year to get Bill Belichick not really be worried about the quarterback position, not make any moves for anybody. Andy Dalton just signed with the Cowboys in a day, right? So you would think that he doesn't have any interest in Cam Newton, doesn't have any interest in Andy Dalton, didn't have any interest in Jameis Winston. He didn't draft a quarterback, and he had opportunity he could have had Jordan Love. He could have traded up in the first round to try to get somebody. They had to draft capital to do some of that. So the fact that Bill Belichick thinks that Stidham is going to be a quality starter makes me think that Bill Belichick is probably right, because more often than not, Bill Belichick has been proven to be right. So I think that with everything else around him, my biggest worry again is the weapons around Stidham, right? So Tom Brady, his last couple of years in New England, didn't have all the weapons. Guys were retiring, guys were leaving. They didn't spend a first round draft pick in 2019 on a rookie wide receiver. Didn't have a great first year, so maybe he'll come back in the second year and be a better player. Obviously, Julian Edelman's still there, but it's the weapons around him. I think he's going to need them to be a little even more than Tom Brady did.
Yeah, they also, one thing we need to always remember is the Patriots play in the AFC East, which is a division they've dominated over the last 20 years. Obviously, with Brady being gone, the odds are going to go up that maybe they might not fare as well. But New York Jets don't have a lot of opportunities to win in that division. Buffalo is a couple pieces away, although they did just pick up Stephon Diggs. And Miami is a work in progress, obviously, with a lot of rookies coming in from the top end of the draft we just broadcasted last weekend. Meanwhile, here in the middle of the Midwest, here in the great state of Wisconsin, the Packers coming in at plus 2,800. How do we feel about Green Bay being sort of a middle of the road Super Bowl team? We have come from an era, right, with a couple of starting quarterbacks since the early 90s where if you didn't go to the AFC or, excuse me, NFC divisional round or the NFC championship game, it wouldn't be considered a successful season. Do you think the Packers have a shot to compete for the Super Bowl? Are we really one or two pieces away, as the media would have you believe?
I personally don't think the Packers are one or two pieces away. I remember saying this last year. I think it was a little bit smoke and mirrors and a lot of luck falling in the right way for the Packers to have as good of a record as they had, right? But the key difference is the Packers are legit Super Bowl contenders because Aaron Rodgers is still Aaron Rodgers and he's still lining up behind center. And until his play drops off even more dramatically than it has the last couple of years, I think they're always have an opportunity when they start every game, and they're always somewhat of a legit Super Bowl contender. But I truly think the Packers last year were, just a couple bounces and skips away from being a 9-7 team. and that kind of showed when they played the big boys in the NFC, and that when they played San Francisco both times, they got wiped out, beaten the floor, right? So the Packers, I don't think were ever one or two people away from making a big push. You say that, but it depends on what one or two people. They weren't one or two draftable people away from becoming a Super Bowl team or more of a Super Bowl team, right? Obviously, more pieces the better, but I think they're in the middle of what they're trying to. Packers are trying to do a quick kind of rebuild without demolishing everything, right? So they added some money in free agency. They're trying to stay somewhat relevant and have and use Aaron Rodgers, get him a few weapons, get him some tools, and then try to make that Super Bowl push. But they don't want the wheels to fall off when Aaron Rodgers is done. So that's the one thing that I think Packers fans got to really latch on to is they are somewhat going all in. They're trying to get Rodgers pieces, and getting Rodgers pieces doesn't just mean get him a wide receiver, right? How many years did the Packers not have a good defense? So they invested in the defense. So Rodgers doesn't feel like he has to score 35 points every game to win, right? So getting pieces to the team to help Aaron Rodgers, but also making sure that when Aaron Rodgers does retire, we don't get in a situation that you saw with the Cowboys or with the Dolphins or with the 49ers when Steve Young left, where they just fall off the face of the earth for 4 or 5 years and they go into this rebuild.
Yeah, I want to follow that up real quickly. Great insight, Dave. Does Aaron Rodgers win another Super Bowl? And notice how I didn't say only in Green Bay.
I mean, it's hard to say, right? Winning a Super Bowl is really, really tough, and there's the Hall of Fame is littered with quarterbacks who only won one Super Bowl or didn't win any Super Bowls, right? So there's a ton of guys out there that haven't won more than one, haven't won any Super Bowls. But if you look at Aaron Rodgers, I mean, again, the NFC is not. There's not a lot of teams in the NFC you think the Packers can't beat. Yes, San Francisco had their number last year, but it was just one of those things where it felt like San Francisco just has our number right now. I don't necessarily think that San Francisco coming in this year, Packers fans should be scared about San Francisco. Yes, the Buccaneers are going to be better. Yes, the Vikings are still there, right? Yes, there's teams that could beat the Packers, the Eagles, or the Cowboys look like they might be really good, but Aaron Rodgers has a legit opportunity. I think as long as the Packers stay healthy and everybody stays healthy, this next 2 years, which more than likely will probably be the last 2 years of Rodgers in Green Bay, I think they have a legit opportunity to go on a Super Bowl run. So it's not wishful, Packer thinking or Homer thinking to think that they might have an opportunity for that. But realistically looking at it, probably have 2 years of Aaron Rodgers, and he's not going to probably want to retire after 2 years. And then he's going to go looking at a situation where he's going to be nearing 40, wants to play for 2 or 3 more years. He's going to look like Brady and try to find a place that he thinks he can be the last piece to put him into the Super Bowl. The same thing Brett Favre did, right? He wants to try to find a team, and he took the Vikings to the NFC title game, right? So I think Aaron Rodgers' window for Super Bowls has still got 4 or 5 good years in it. A couple of those should be with the Packers, but then there's going to be a few of those that are probably going to be with whoever can pay him the most money and give him the best odds to capture that Super Bowl.
Yeah, it's interesting. There was actually some reports that came out yesterday of the predicted top 7 landing spots for Aaron Rodgers and the impact on the salary cap and when it would get more realistic. Because the reality is Green Bay isn't realistically going to have an opportunity to trade this guy for at least another season, if not longer, right? To sort of realize some balance on the salary cap on the books. So should be interesting. I'm not going to weigh in on whether or not we win another Super Bowl. I kind of want to have that play out. Obviously, we're not in the world of making predictions, but we will be talking about the world of predictions in the NFL schedule release, which is slated to happen on May 9th. So that's going to be coming up in prime time. I'm your host, Travis Pipes. Dave Mogensen sitting across the way in Oshkosh. We are Double Coverage Radio. We are going to be bringing you all the content of the NFL schedule release. We'll be talking about the Packers. We'll be talking about the Bears. We'll be talking about the Chargers. We're going to talk about all 32 teams. We're going to break down the schedules. We're going to talk about some of the highlighted games. Along those lines, to give just a little bit of a tidbit, a little bit of a preview, Dave, how do you feel about the potential contingency plan for the NFL if the season has to be either delayed, postponed, or reworked in some fashion? Will we be playing Super Bowl 55 in Tampa on February 4th?
I think all of us don't really know what's going to happen. The whole world obviously has changed in the last 2 months, right? So I think the NFL at this point is really committed to doing that, and they want to make sure that happens. and they're going through various different ways on what that might be. There's obviously a good chance that the Super Bowl gets pushed back. I think the unique things that they're making small changes now. They just announced today they're not going to play the international games this year. There's been talk about if NCAA football doesn't go on, they may play some games on Saturdays and they can start the season a little bit later and play some more games that way, eliminate bye weeks. There's a lot of things that they still can do, even playing a shortened season. I think hopefully we get to a point where they can at least have some fans in the stands for this fall, right? Playing games with no fans there is just something it's going to be difficult for I think the players to really play the way they want to play, right? So many of these guys feed off the fans and the energy that fans bring to games. I think it's most important. People will say, yeah, they want the fans in there because that's a lot of money they're losing, but NFL money is made by TV, right? And TV contracts. So as long as the games are on TV, people are going to watch whether there's fans in the stands or not. But I think that from a player perspective and a team perspective, trying to get people in there, and hopefully that we're at a point for that. But I definitely think that some of the stuff, is a little bit weird and a little bit crazy, and playing games on Saturdays and Sundays is a little bit weird, right? And not having bye weeks is something that you think that worries about how can my team stay healthy without a bye week through a 14, even if it's a 14-week season. So there's some
Yeah.
things that are going to be interesting and unique, but we're going to have to just kind of roll with it because everything has changed thus far in the last 2 months. So many of us didn't think we'd be able to roll with it that way. And the NFL is going to be no different. It'll be really interesting to see how the NBA comes back and what they do here and what Major League Baseball does this summer. I think that'll help lead the way to what the NFL does.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's definitely going to be some contingency plans in place, clearly, depending on the landscape as it affects NFL football. In my opinion, they will be taking the cues directly from the other professional sports leagues. We'll see where that goes. I am your host, Travis Pipes. He is Dave Mogensen. We are always rolling with the changes here on Double Coverage Radio. For more coverage about professional football, all the way down to the preps, check us out on Facebook at Double Coverage Radio, and we are available on doublecoverageradio.com. Check back for more updates on the Facebook page. Like us, share us, let everybody know you're watching football with Pipes and Mogs, and we will see you next time for the NFL schedule release show. Have a great night, everybody. Thank you for tuning in.